Good morning and welcome to today's event, AI Implications for Workforce Development and Economic Mobility. I'm Laura Choi and I serve as Executive Vice President of Regional Engagement here at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. The San Francisco Fed serves the 12th district, which is the largest in the Federal Reserve System and includes the 9 western states, 2 territories, and the Commonwealth. So with such a wide variety of people, industries, and regional economic conditions, the San Francisco Fed regularly engages with businesses and communities to gather real-time information on local economic conditions. And this local insight that we collect is crucial. It complements the Fed's quantitative data and analyses and ensures that the unique perspectives of the 12th district are heard when the Federal Open Market Committee is making its decisions on monetary policy. And we also see ourselves as a resource for the people that we serve, so connecting them with economic data, research, and analysis. And that's why we're here today for this EmergingTech Economic Research Network, or EERN, event, co-hosted with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. EERN events allow researchers, technologists, and members of our communities to engage in dialogue that fosters deeper insights into the economy of the future. So today's conversation will focus on the evolving intersection of AI, workforce development, and economic mobility. So we'll start with a presentation from Elizabeth Kneebone, Assistant Vice President of Research in Community Engagement and Analysis. And she'll be sharing a preview of forthcoming research quantifying AI exposure for workers from low to moderate income households. Her research will serve as a backdrop for a panel discussion on how workforce development leaders and employers are anticipating changes to their work and adapting their practices. And we'll conclude with a conversation between San Francisco Fed President and CEO Mary Daly and Jeremy Owens of the San Francisco Business Times. So we hope that you'll leave today with a deeper understanding of how AI is affecting different workers in the economy and what this could mean for economic mobility. So finally, please note that the views you hear today are those of our speakers and do not necessarily represent those of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco or Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. So with that, let's get to our first speaker. Please welcome Elizabeth Kneebone.
Thank you for that introduction, Laura. As Laura said, I'm going to be sharing some research that I've been working on with my colleague Natalie Holmes. Hopefully by providing, by way of context and background for the discussions we're going to be having today. And when Natalie and I approached this research, one of the things we were really interested in is this concept of exposure, the sense of what could be the potential scale. This is such rapidly evolving landscape. The technology is changing by the day. What's the potential scale this could have on our workers, on our economy? And there's a real growing literature that engages with that idea about just by the sake of just the nature of the work that people do in their day-to-day tasks, some workers are going to be more exposed to the evolution and adoption of AI than others. The tasks that they do are more likely to be either helped or potentially replaced. Maybe even some roles entirely might be replaced by this technology. And the literature that's been done to date suggests that the workers that are most likely to face that kind of exposure, that sort of the early wave of the where do we see that exposure, expect that to be concentrated, tend to be workers in more highly educated, higher earning occupations, sort of white collar jobs. And that's a big part of the picture. But we also know that's not the full picture. And so in coming to this research, Natalie and I wanted to build on this body of research and literature that's been growing in this space, but also contribute to it by exploring a segment of the labor market that's not often, or at least is less explored in these conversations. And that's workers at the lower end of the income distribution. There are a couple reasons why we want to take that perspective. One is it's less explored. And in truly understanding the scope of the impacts on the economy, we want to have the full picture. But also, it comes from the fact that Natalie and I, we work in the community engagement and analysis function at the San Francisco Fed. And that part of the bank is charged with working to better understand how economic conditions are impacting low and moderate income workers, how are evolving conditions in the economy being felt by those populations. So that's what we wanted to bring to this research, was this better understanding of this segment of the workforce But in doing so, we also wanted to bring together some mixed methods in our approach. So we know there are some good data and metrics that we can bring to bear to try to understand the scope and scale of what the potential impacts might be. But we also wanted to ground that data with real-time insights. Again, this is all changing so rapidly. It's really important to reach out to the stakeholders who are working directly with low and moderate income workers, employers who employ a range of workers in this space. And in the community engagement analysis function, we have researchers like myself, like Natalie, but we also have staff who are involved in outreach and engagement. They're deeply embedded in communities throughout the district, really throughout the Federal Reserve system, building deep networks of stakeholders that can help us gather those real-time insights. So we were able to do that in the course of this analysis as well. And I want to share findings from both this quantitative and qualitative approach we took to this work. But as we get started, I also want to just do some level setting. Just explain some key terms, how we're thinking about and approaching this work, because you're going to hear me say these terms quite a few times. So first, just the idea of workers. Just want to clarify that we're looking at the civilian labor force here. And the point I also want to point out, not just workers who were employed when they were captured in the moment of the data, but people who had earned incomes in the past year. And this is just a recognition of the fact that lower income workers often have more employment volatility, so we wanted to cast that broader picture and make sure we're including people who had earned income in the last year. Also, what do we mean by lower income? There are a lot of ways to think about that. What might low and moderate income workers look like? The way that we approach this for this analysis is first starting with households. What households are in the lower part of the income distribution? So if you have a typical household income in your community, any households that have combined resources that are below 80% for the household of their size, that's what we're considering lower income. And one reason we look at this is, especially if we're thinking about some of the downside risks that might be involved with this kinds of technological transformation, what workers may have fewer resources, may have the least bit of cushion if they were to experience a disruption in their employment. And this approach takes a more holistic view of thinking of all the resources coming into the household. These workers are really in the lowest part of the income distribution. So the final concept that I want to talk about before really diving in, I've already sort of broached this idea of exposure, that just by the nature of the work that someone does, there may be tasks that are more likely to be aided or replaced by tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or other Gen AI technology. I want to go a little bit deeper on this because, again, I said we wanted to build on existing literature. So our approach in defining exposure was developed by economists at Pew and at the US Treasury Department. And the approach used basically takes Bureau of Labor Statistics data. It gives us a lot of information about what are the tasks associated with different occupations and how important are those tasks to that particular occupation. So in thinking about exposure, this approach categorizes tasks into whether there's a high likelihood that they could be exposed to AI, again, either aided or replaced, medium or low. And so once we've identified the high exposure tasks, then we can think about how important are those tasks to the job. So what we do is we have this ranking of relative importance of high AI exposure jobs for each occupation. And for the purposes of this analysis, we're going to be focusing on the top quarter, right? The top 25% where high AI exposure tasks are particularly important to that job. I want to recognize here that you could draw this line elsewhere. And just because an occupation falls below this line does not mean that it's not being impacted by AI. Again, especially as we see how this is changing and percolating through our economy in different ways every day. Think about this more as a framing exercise, as a way to start by saying what occupations are on that first wave, are likely to be impacted first and most by just the nature of the work that's being done. And what can we find out or learn about those occupations? And when we take that approach and we apply it, we're looking at microdata from the US Census, American Community Survey data. We find that in 2023, the data that were the most recent data we had for this analysis, almost 31 million workers in the broader workforce are in these high AI exposure occupations. So that's not quite a fifth of workers in the country that fall in that, again, top tier of exposure. But among those workers, more than 6 million of them live in a lower income household. So again, it's not the biggest piece of the puzzle, but it's an important one. 1 in 5 of these workers live in a lower income household. So what do we know about those workers, particularly in that segment of the workforce? We can look using this data to understand more about what kinds of jobs they're holding that put them in that sort of high exposure category. What we see overall, typically these workers are in the private sector. But by zooming in to that lower income segment, we see those workers who are highly exposed to AI are slightly more likely to be self-employed, and they're more likely to be working in the nonprofit sector. We can take this a step further, right? This is occupation-based data. What jobs are we actually talking about? And when we look at the leading occupations for AI-exposed workers, they're the same, whether you're looking at the whole population of workers or workers living in lower income households. But the difference that emerged by zooming in on those lower income workers is they're much more concentrated in that first occupation, which is office and administrative support. So half of workers in low-income households who are highly exposed to AI are working in office and admin jobs. Again, that tells us something about the work that that individual person does, but what does their company do? What kind of companies, what sorts of industries might be more exposed in this sense? So we can layer on that information. So let's stick with that 50% of workers who work in office and administrative support occupations. What industries are they in? What do their companies do? You see in these leading industries a real service orientation to the types of jobs being worked, the companies that they're working for. The number one industry in which these workers are working is healthcare and social assistance. So if you think about who that is, you can think about the office assistant or the administrative assistant that works at a dentist office or a hospital or a doctor's office, a nursing home. On the social assistance side, this could be the office and administrative support at a food pantry or a community center. And remember, I said that nonprofit or that low-income workers were more likely to be working in nonprofits that are those that are exposed to AI. In this category, that's even more true. It's 20% of workers in this category that are working in the nonprofit sector. So again, by layering, we start to see more nuance about how these uneven exposures or potential for impacts are spread across different types of workers in different parts of the economy. We also know these workers look somewhat different from the broader pool of workers overall. So just zooming in on low-income workers, those who are in jobs that are exposed to AI, they're more likely to be female. They are more likely to have higher educational attainment and to be higher earning. Excuse me. So see, very similar to the findings that the research so far has found about the workforce as a whole, that there are some differences in these workers who are in these high exposure occupations. And thinking about these differences, I think it raises important research questions and things to engage around and think about how this is going to transmit through the economy, because on one hand, exposure could be good, right? It could augment someone's capabilities within their job. Perhaps it could offer up pathways to mobility within their job. But it could also have some downside impacts, right? It could replace tasks, it could replace whole workers. So to the extent that we're on the upside of that, and we see these workers are already in that bit of a higher earning part of the distribution, is that the pathway for them to move out of this lower income status, to have some upward economic mobility? If so, how do we think about, or what opportunities are there to make sure that there are more workers in this lower income pool who have that same on-ramp, right? But on the other side, if this is on the downside impacts of this and it's eroding jobs, then are we ending up seeing that this erosion is happening at jobs that were relatively better paid for lower income workers than the options as a whole in this bucket? And in that case, are we seeing broadening inequality? And the answer to those questions is probably a mixed bag, right? And it's going to depend on where we're looking in the labor market, where we're looking in the country. Because we also know that labor markets do not look the same. There's a lot of variation under the national numbers that we see, because the communities people live in, the states you might live in, have different types of jobs, different types of workforce. So these numbers will play out differently as we dig below the surface. And we see that in terms of just the exposure to AI in the first place, but also who is making up the individuals in that exposed category. So the share of workers who are low income in that category ranges pretty broadly across the country. You see a much higher than average share in the Intermountain West, in places like Alaska, in Texas, but you also see a lower share in places like Nevada or New Mexico or Maine. And it's not just that size of the pie that is made up of low-income workers in this exposure space, it's also the kinds of work that they're doing and the types of jobs that might be in that exposure pool. So returning again to this idea of office and administrative support being a pretty predominant occupation in this exposure space, that's true. And across the country, every state, that is the leading occupation for high exposure jobs among low-income workers. But how much of a share of those jobs it makes up really varies. And you see a real range from over 60% in Hawaii to more like a third in places like Utah and the District of Columbia. So even in a place like Arizona, that's a little bit below average for that share working in office and admin. It's somewhat below 50%. If you start to zoom in, you see even greater variation. So it really does show how localized some of these potential impacts could be. We look at the county level or collection of counties in places where sample sizes might be smaller. You see a range from over 80% on the high end down to less than a third on the lower end. And what that tells me is that that makeup, what's the other part of the pie, really varies. How diverse is the makeup of exposed occupations, and what do they look like can really vary. And we see that showing up, like take a place like San Francisco, right? The sort of hotbed of AI activity. When we look at the share of low-income workers who are highly exposed and what occupations they're in, we see some variation. So for the state of California, it's very on par with the national average. 50% of those workers are in office and admin occupations. But that's not the case for the Bay Area. It's more like 40%. And then from there, even the mix and makeup of what other occupations are included in that list differs, right? In the national list, we didn't see arts and design and entertainment, but you do for California and you do in the metropolitan area of San Francisco. So again, I think it really brings home how these are national, like macro level trends that we're trying to understand, but the way they go to ground in local communities can look very different. And that was something that really became clear and was apparent in the qualitative listening sessions that we did. So we were able to have listening sessions in 4 different parts of our district, and in partnership with Atlanta, hold a listening session in their district as well, in New Orleans. In these listening sessions, we were able to share localized data, like the data that I've just walked through with you, for these local communities, to test and ground truth that data with local stakeholders, and to see, A, how much it may be resonating with them, refine our methods and think about our interpretation, but also in some cases, it was providing data that helped frame what people were seeing and experiencing in their real-time, sort of on-the-ground observations of the rollout of this technology. And the stakeholders we talked to an array of different people, like nearly 50 different participants in these listening sessions, who were from workforce boards, who were from community colleges, training programs and other nonprofits who work with lower income workers. Also employers who employ a range of different types of workers, trying to gain their perspectives into how they were seeing this play out in real time. And one thing that we heard that was consistent across these interactions was just this feeling that if you work with a computer, you're gonna need to know how to work with AI. This is a quote that came from our very first listening session, but was a common theme we heard throughout these conversations, was just this realization, this sense that this is here to stay, and it's going to become something that everybody's gonna need to know how to work with if you're working with a computer. Other sort of insights that arose from these conversations was even with that realization of how important this is going to be, how ubiquitous this is going to feel, is that adoption so far has been pretty uneven. And this came through in talking to individuals, just in terms of their own work and how they were thinking about these tools and bringing it into the work that they might be doing, how they were seeing other people in their organizations experiment or not with these tools. It was true at an organizational level. Did organizations even themselves have any policies around AI? Were there tools that were encouraged or made available and to use across the organization? Or in some cases, were they prohibited? Was there a real risk aversion that kind of left those organizations sitting on the sidelines to date? And then it also was a real range in terms of from sitting on the sidelines, not doing anything with AI, to talking to some nonprofits and employers who were really experimenting with building their own tools to think about how they were doing their own service delivery, whether that's working with lower income clients or thinking for businesses how to deliver the services that they're providing. So we see this real range, and part of one of the things that we found that was kind of driving it, especially for nonprofits, was what was the ability and the resources to experiment? So some nonprofits who were able to attract more flexible philanthropic funding were more able to build new tools or to really experiment with how this might be integrated in effective ways in the work that they were doing. Others with more constrained or risk-averse funding sources were the ones that were more likely to be sitting on the sidelines and not necessarily even experimenting yet. For those who had made some progress in adopting this and bringing it into the work that they were doing, we were already hearing across different stakeholders, across different locations, the ways that it was already beginning to affect employment. That could be something from just the skills needed or tasks done in a certain job shifting because now there were tools available that helped replace that task or make it more effective or open up bandwidth to do other things. So it was shifting how some roles were organized. For some, in both the nonprofit and the business space, it was actually leading them to forego hiring new people. There might have been a position that they thought they needed to fill, but for now they were going to wait and see if there was a way to employ AI to do that without adding to their headcount. And in some cases, both nonprofits and employers had reported that they had reduced their headcount. They had actually found the efficiencies they were looking for and were able to eliminate a position or more. And the motivations, again, for why they were finding these different employment approaches really varied. For some nonprofits, they mentioned a really constrained funding environment and a very uncertain one, where they were seeing shrinking budgets and trying to figure out how to do more with less. They were looking to these kinds of tools to help fill those gaps and really make every dollar stretch further. For some businesses that we spoke to, they reported they'd had consistent trouble hiring for certain types of positions. And in this case, maybe they could just use these tools to replace that need or fill that gap because they weren't able to find the people they were hoping for those jobs. So again, a really wide range of experience, but clear how it's already percolating through and having impacts for a lot of different types of stakeholders in a lot of different markets. And another theme, the sort of final theme I want to share that coming out of these conversations was seeing the opportunity. That there really were a lot of perspectives on the ways that this could help in things like training and education, in helping lower-income workers upskill, potentially find better matching opportunities or greater employment opportunities because they are fluent with these skills or know how to use them to their advantage. One of the challenges, though, and the sort of downside risk that came through these conversations was also thinking about how to best leverage the systems that we do have. And I know we're going to have a lot more time to talk about that in our panel conversation coming up, but in our conversations, people were raising things like, you have K through 12, community colleges, universities, workforce training, nonprofit supports. All of those things together make up the system, but they each have their own role to play. How to most effectively leverage each of those pieces to work at scale to help workers navigate this technological transition, there were still a lot of questions about where and how to make all of that happen in an effective way to meet the moment. Again, one that is unfurling so rapidly. The other question was, what about workers who are not touching any one of those pieces of the system at this point? They're currently employed, but may be buffeted by some of these changes. They may need to reconnect with some of these parts of the system to think about reskilling or upskilling. And the real crux of the moment is how to most effectively reach those workers so they're not left behind, but can actually benefit from the opportunities that this type of technology presents. That's really where we're going to go in the next conversations, is to think about those questions, those opportunities, how to mitigate against downside risks. I'm really looking forward to turning the stage over to Natalie and our whole panel of experts to offer their insights of how their work is evolving in this space and what they're observing. I want to first thank you all for listening, for your time, your intention, engaging in this conversation. I will ask you please to sit tight for the short transition while we trade over the stage. But again, thank you so much for being part of this conversation.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us here in person and online. My name's Natalie Holmes. I'm a researcher here at the San Francisco Fed on our community engagement and analysis team, working with Elizabeth Nebone, who you heard from earlier. So as you just heard from Elizabeth, as part of our exploration of lower income workers' potential exposure to AI, we've had a chance to speak with several dozen workforce development practitioners from around the 12th Federal Reserve District and beyond. We've talked to
nonprofit service providers, training organizations, community colleges, financial institutions, employers. And these conversations have helped us figure out what's happening kind of in real time, or hear how people are working through this in real time. So we wanted to take the opportunity to share some of that with you all today. I just wanted to take a moment to also thank those of you here in person and who are watching online, and for those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, we tried to work some of them into our discussion today. All right, so just to start, what are we talking about when we talk about workforce development? So the specifics will depend on who you ask. I bet there are different perspectives within this very room. Some of the big goals of these programs and policies that span every level of government and private institutions include encouraging maximum employment. Some of the goals include supporting or addressing labor shortages in target industries, but then we can also think about workforce development from the perspective of supporting individuals to build the lives that they want for themselves and their families. Okay, so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce a really deep bench of workforce expertise up here, people who are working on training and supporting lower income workers and communities. All right, I'm gonna go alphabetically. So Dr. Armetta Burney is the Dean of Technology, Applied Science, and Public Services at Clackamas Community College in Oregon City, Oregon, which is in the Portland metropolitan area, where she oversees career and technical education programming. Armetta, you've been in the CTE space for a long time and have also worked on programs that support vulnerable students. Can you tell us a bit more about CTE education in general, what it is, some about who your students are, and then can you tell us about how you all are thinking about AI?
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this important discussion. Again, my name is Armetta Burney. I am a dean at Clackamas Community College, and under my umbrella, I primarily support faculty and students who are pursuing career and technical education programs. And career and technical education programs are extremely unique in that the goal of our programs is to really ensure that as soon as students complete their training, they are ready for work. So whether or not they are pursuing a 2-year degree or a shorter term certificate that could be 6 months, 12 months, or a year, the goal is to ensure that our students have the skills that they need and the readiness to immediately join the workforce. And so an important component of that is to ensure that we are working very, very closely with industry. And so each one of those programs has an advisory committee, and they help to inform our faculty members to help ensure that we have the right curriculum embedded in the programs, that we are training students with the right skills, that we have the proper machinery in our labs to mimic what's happening in industry to ensure the preparedness of our students. And so when I think about who our students are, well, as a community college as a whole, we serve approximately 23% of our students are between 18 and 21. 18% of our students are high school students, so they are working on advancing themselves to make sure they're ready for community college once they've completed their high school diplomas. But then the other population of students, they would be considered more of our non-traditional students. So those students that are generally between 29 and 49, many of those students are pursuing career and technical education programs. So some students, it's their first time attending college. Other students, they're trying again. Maybe another student, they are reskilling, they are upskilling. And so we serve a wide range of students, and we want to make sure that we are meeting each and every one of those students right where they are at. So it doesn't matter where they're coming from. The goal is to make sure that we are meeting them where they are, and we're providing them with the resources and the training that they need to help ensure their success. And so as we think about AI, we know that it's already here. It is upon us. So what are we doing to make sure that we're ready as an institution? What are we doing to make sure our faculty are ready and that our students are ready? And the first thing that I would say around that is that anything that we do, we want to make sure that it aligns with our mission, vision, and values. And so ensuring that we have policies in place so that faculty understand how to utilize AI and that our students understand ethically how to utilize it. And so we are just now getting into that space. I would say that we may be a little behind, and so we're catching up. Lastly, I'll add that when we think about AI, the goal is to make sure that we are embedding that in our existing pathways. So not that we're doing something separate, but ensuring that AI tools, how to utilize it, how it benefits students is embedded right in our existing curriculum.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Armetta. So Armetta was part of our first roundtable discussion, and one thing that really stuck with all of us who were there was this concept that in every class, regardless of whether it's directly involved in AI, the faculty are working to incorporate this so that you have exposure to these tools, whatever your prospective job is going to be. All right, Lisa Countryman-Quiros is CEO of JVS, which is a more than 50-year-old nonprofit here in the Bay Area that supports low-income job seekers across the state of California. JVS offers training programs and job placement assistance focusing on career pathways with opportunity for economic advancement, so including various roles in healthcare, technology, and skilled trades. Lisa, how are you guys thinking about AI, both in terms of how you think about which jobs have opportunity for economic advancement, and then how you all are teaching and training in your programs?
Sure, thank you. It's good to be here. So we think that AI is a critical tool that can help level the playing field, and that means leveling the playing field both for sort of chronically under-resourced nonprofits and social impact organizations, but also for the job seekers that we work with. It happens that really since the Great Recession, we've been focused on helping low-income people access jobs that are both accessible, meaning they don't require a four-year degree, but that also offer a very high quality of life, strong pay, good benefits. And it happens that those positions really align well with the jobs that have been identified as pretty AI resistant. So that's good news. There's continuing to be opportunities in healthcare, in the skilled trades. But we also believe that we need to be integrating AI skills training into all of the pathways that we provide. And yet it's important for us all to remember that that starts with digital skills and digital awareness. Over a third of US workers lack basic digital literacy. And so this is a really important part of sort of any workforce development or adult training offering, is to consider and include really strong digital skills training, building towards AI literacy and AI awareness. And so we're doing that across all of our training programs, include basic digital literacy skills, building towards AI fluency, as well as social and emotional skills. So this is sort of the other side of the AI transformation that I think we all have to be thinking about. And that is, as technology advances, we have to really double down on those human skills. And that's something that we consistently hear from employers. They want to see strong communication skills, strong collaboration skills, as well as ability to leverage AI and critical thinking.
That's great, thank you. You'll hear a lot of themes come up today. All right, Jimmy McDonough is the Assistant Commissioner for Higher Education Workforce Programs at the Utah System of Higher Education, where he leads statewide strategies to align post-secondary education with the evolving needs of the labor market. So working to connect industry, education, and government, basically. Jimmy, in your current role, you've got this 10,000-foot view of what's happening in your state. Can you talk us through what it's like to aggregate a lot of really complex information and turn it into coherent policy? And then how do you get your arms around what's happening with AI, which is in many ways evolving faster than we can keep up with it?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me here today as well. As you stated, I am representing the Utah System of Higher Education. We have 16 institutions that include technical colleges, community college, and degree-granting institutions throughout the state. I'm part of an office called Talent Ready Utah, and our statutory role actually, though, is from kindergarten all the way up through PhD. So we kind of span that whole realm of education. And a lot of what we're doing is, convening a lot of the partners and stakeholders and really collecting, assessing, and then acting on information. AI has such huge implications for us as a state because it's not so individual of just AI. It comes back to energy resourcing and all of those things. There's a lot of policy implications to AI, but also as a state, we want to be competitive. We want to be the best state out of there that's attracting employers, that's attracting industry, and typically the top thing for that is, do we have a workforce to support that? And so really having those conversations with employers to kind of see how can we do that and what those needs are, and really making sure that we can prepare that workforce. Utah has a great problem of having a low unemployment. And so we have to focus on every single population and making sure that they're prepared, and looking at how that works and how we can develop strategies for that. Specifically when we start talking about low income, middle income families, really kind of taking a look at who are we talking about? Who are those pockets, and how are they currently engaging in systems, and how can we provide that support and training? And so one of the top areas for low income would be translation services, education support for their children, and so really honing into how can we provide support and training that meet those individuals where they are to bring them up to speed. But also as a state, really taking a look at businesses and industry and how are we providing policies that support them as well to be able to explore in the uses of AI, how do we make it a safe place that they learn from that as well. So really looking at our legislative requirements, are we creating and creating an environment for support, for flexibility, for innovation, and really kind of making sure that our systems align to create that workforce and provide that training for everyone to be successful and thrive.
All right, Sarah Miller is a director and principal advisor for community and economic development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and co-leads the Atlanta Fed's Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity. Her research focuses on worker experiences in the labor market and their perspectives on employment stability and mobility. Sarah, you've spent a lot of time talking to individual low-income workers and also more recently to employers. What are some of the things you're hearing from both workers and then on the labor demand side about how AI is coming onto their radar?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me in your partnership. And I'm realizing that I hugged up too close to you, and I should have been one down, shifted in the flow. But yeah, so in what we're hearing from workers, first of all, just a little bit of level setting. So as we kind of noted this morning, the Fed does a lot of listening in our communities to our regional economies so we get a broader picture on how we're understanding economic conditions, blending that with kind of the hard economic data. A key stakeholder in that are the workers themselves. So I would say over the past several years, the Fed has started to more qualitatively engage directly with workers and job seekers, particularly those that are in lower or moderate income roles, really to understand their perspectives on employment, what those perspectives mean in terms of what they're looking for, and ultimately how they behave in the labor market as it supports kind of our full employment mandate. Now, I'll say when we first started doing this work about 2.5, 3 years ago, the AI question was not a question that we were asking. That's how rapidly evolving this space is. So this is a part of an ongoing body of research where we are starting to incorporate some of these questions so that we're hearing directly from them. What is their concern? Where are they seeing those task augmentations? Where are they seeing that task replacement? So there's more to come on that and what we're actually hearing directly from the workers. In our qualitative work. We also do mixed methods and have been partnering with an organization called the Skill Up Coalition. They routinely survey their users that are in some way, shape, or form coming to their site to pursue some kind of skill development. And in their pulse survey that they do, we just added a question, and out of 6,000 responses to what is your opinion on AI, about a third said, I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about the opportunities. There was, however, 18% that said, I'm very concerned about the impact that this could have on my job. And about 14% said, I don't know enough yet. So this is a true mixed bag here in terms of what we're hearing directly from workers and job seekers. Very, very anecdotally in the initial conversations that we've had, we've kind of gotten the sense that, oh, it's just another thing that we'll have to use It's no big deal. It's going to help. We got to roll kind of with those punches effectively in terms of these changes to technology and how I interact with my job, how I interact with the world. But on the employer side, I'll be able to kind of reiterate some of the things that Elizabeth was able to highlight here this morning. And speaking from, certainly I have more perspective on employers that we engage more in the Southeast and the area that the Atlanta Fed covers. And it is across the board just differences in adoption, of readiness, of place and space where they're using this. And we're hearing a lot around the looking for capacity creation and using this, not necessarily replacement. And ultimately the goal being that AI is just, these tools start to work on the back end so that it's just a seamless infusion to the role and creates more productivity and efficiency within the workspace. But we are certainly hearing, as Elizabeth noted, this is having effects on how quickly they're hiring and really thinking about how we're using AI and technology to address some maybe workforce shortages that they've been experiencing in roles that have high turnover and where they can gain some efficiencies there, but also just being really more intentional, I would say, at this moment in this kind of ever-evolving space to see how that technology continues to come online, how they can embed that in their work, and then ultimately what effect is that going to have on their workforce planning. And I know we'll talk a little bit later about more what we're seeing kind of in the data side of these. But
So I just wanted to follow up actually and ask, are there particular bright spots or opportunities that either the workers you're talking to are seeing with these new tools?
Absolutely. Really interestingly enough, when we were asking kind of, like I said, we're talking with lower income workers in lower income roles that have very kind of precarious economic stability. And really trying to understand from them, like, how are you finding jobs? What is it that you're looking for? What are the barriers that are standing in your way? And then when asking about this AI, we heard a lot about how people are just using it in their personal lives. I'm using it to help me meal plan. If I only have $50 for the week and I have to feed 4 people, how can I use this? And really gaining some efficiencies that way. Or I need to have some free activities for my children and my family, what's in my area. So they're using that, I thought, in really interesting ways to kind of help, spread the dollar or to stretch the dollar, rather, especially when they're in these kind of lower income jobs. We are hearing that they're using it, though, as well, with all of these other things that the workforce system will interface with them on, how to write a better resume, how to fill out a better job application, how to track their applications, how to find these opportunities. But again, this is a continuing body of research, so we're really interested that we can hear from that front line and how the evolution of the use of these tools, the adoption of these tools, and the effect of these tools is really going to take shape with this population.
Lisa, I know you had some thoughts also about, you mentioned this in your introduction, about particular bright spots or opportunities for this segment of the population that we might see here.
Sure. I mean, as I said, we see that the AI-resistant roles tend to be more hands-on roles, opportunities in healthcare, opportunities in the skilled trades. We continue to lean into that. And at the same time, as I think we all who have experimented with AI know, there are so many unlocks that are available there. And so as we get sort of more of this work under our belt in terms of integrating those tools as a really critical part of the job search, as a research tool, as a support if maybe you don't have super strong writing skills, this can open up so many more opportunities. And so we will be looking to share more of those findings as we've done that. I'll also say, and I find this to be a particular bright spot, I was very inspired. There was a recent piece of research from McKinsey on the assumptions that CEOs had about their staff and how ready their staff were to integrate AI, and the feeling was, I don't think my staff's ready. And yet against that was the fact that so many employees were already using AI. And so we held an AI summit for all of our JVS team members, and it was really led by team members, people who were already using AI tools in all different kinds of ways, helping job seekers in their job search, to very internal sort of evaluation and data measurement kinds of tools. And we hosted sort of a science fair for our staff to really get inspired and understand all the different ways they could be using this for efficiency in their role, to solve for some skill gaps that they may have. And so it was a really exciting opportunity, and I think it really kind of shifted the mood internally towards excitement and enthusiasm around these tools and a readiness to start integrating it as opposed to resistance.
Thank you. Okay, switching gears slightly, and I know there will be a lot of different answers to this question, but I'm curious how in your individual roles, we'll start with Armetta, you're thinking about what we should be training and how.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And so I would say that when it comes to the classroom, one of the really important factors is that AI is utilized to complement the learning.
Right.
So what are some examples of how that is working right now? And so in conversations with my own faculty, one example is that in a coding class, a faculty member may ask students to use AI to code something. They'll come back with that, but then they have to utilize their critical thinking skills to evaluate the code, to identify how it could have been written better. And so again, reminding ourselves that this is a tool to complement the learning that is already happening. Another example would be in our early childhood education program. A faculty member may ask students to develop a syllabus or a learning tool for your classroom. They will utilize AI to develop that lesson plan, and then will ask students to identify ways in which, with their own thinking and learning, how it could be improved. So those are just a couple of examples of how our instructors are utilizing AI to enhance the learning that is already happening in the class.
Great. Jimmy, I want to follow up with you since you have such a broad range of ages that your role covers.
It was really interesting. Real example. Last night I was actually on a Zoom call, and it was an administrator of a public school that I was talking to, and we were pulling some information about critical learning theories. And her school district blocks access to ChatGPT. And so I bring that up because I think there are so many implications that AI has to be used at all levels at this point. And so we really have to take a look at a policy level, and I understand there's security implications, and I understand privacy. I do understand that, and there has to be still safeguards, and so I don't want to minimize that. But if we have teachers at that very level that cannot use it, then that means they're not comfortable with it because they don't have access to it. And then if they're not comfortable and they don't have access, they can't be teaching it. And then they can't be having their students use it. And so that goes as early of public education, but it goes all the way up to the college level as well. And so it was a really relevant experience of yesterday, but we take a look of, we need to make sure that all of our students, and I think you were talking about this earlier, data literacy, information literacy, all those different pieces. But then there's also a lot about, critical thinking skills. Again, with AI, you have to be able, and you just talked about this too, you have to be able to leverage some knowledge. And so being able to show how we're using that as a tool, how to be creative. And so again, teaching creativity of how can you, what is a new way that you can think about using AI, that you can ask that question, which goes into prompt engineering. A lot of AI is how to ask the right questions, but how do we teach that? How are we teaching that skill set for individuals on how am I creative and how am I using this? And then there's ethical implications and ethical reasoning and how are you processing that? So there's a lot of skill sets, and I think as we talk about AI usage, AI is right now, and a lot of industry will tell you, hey, we're on the next thing. A lot of industry is looking for what comes after AI. And so we really have to be conscious of what are the skill sets that we need to teach. What is about innovation and being able to leverage a tool for the next best thing? Because if we just teach to AI, when AI evolves to the next thing, possibly next month, do people and do individuals have the skill set? Do they have the knowledge for continuous learning on how to grow? Have we focused so much that you just have to learn this one piece, or have we instilled that skill of how do I go and continue to learn about more things? And so all of that, I think, is critically important. And also then just making sure that everyone has access. One of the things that we often see is, there's a lot of confusion when we start talking about education. And when we have teachers that are saying, even at a higher ed level, like, you cannot use this, that's cheating. Well, okay, you have certain groups, and research shows us that, females, will follow that rule typically, and they'll listen. Males, typically will well, I'm still gonna try it. But what we're now seeing is there's equity issues now that are happening. That you have males that have a lot more exposure in AI than females, but when you looked at the graph that was shared earlier, you see that more, especially in lower income, there are more females. And so now they have less access, they have less experience. So again, really being conscious of the ripple effect of all of these decisions and access and policies, how it really does impact everyone.
So following up on one thread about skills, so it sounds like we're all hearing that sort of critical thinking, essential soft skills are more important than ever. Sarah, what can we say about what employers are looking for or starting to ask for based on the conversations you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of start by framing this around a really beautiful anecdote that we heard in one of our roundtable sessions, where an employer was trying to talk about the difference between ultimately people that would be developing AI versus people that just have to use it and work alongside of it. So it's kind of like this notion that you either know how to drive the car or you know how to build the car. And the car is changing and the rules of the road are changing all of the time. So when we think about, we all need to know how to drive the car. It's what Lisa brought up earlier, this baseline of digital skill literacy that we all need to have. So in we did some analysis of job postings data. So we get a sense of what are employers signaling to the market that they're actually looking for, and what can we understand about what they're saying that they need. In 2021, we looked at about 43 million job postings and found that 92% of all jobs require at least one digital skill. And these are just digital skills. We're talking about, fluency in Microsoft Office, computer literacy, machine learning, things like that. So we see that as just foundational and fundamental to the job market right now. You're also seeing that the more a job requires digital skills, the higher paying that job becomes. But to follow back up on that, to also look at where are the jobs that are the development of AI? Where are employers signaling that I need people with these types of skills? So that's, predictive analytics, predictive modeling, natural language processing, generative AI, the people that are developing it, where are we seeing that? So of course that's vetted in all of the literature. You're going to see that more for the jobs that require a bachelor, master's, PhD, but we're also seeing growth in the associate level degrees for these kind of computer and mathematical skills. So from a baseline of we all need to have those digital skills, but not everybody would necessarily need to learn how to build AI. Believe me, I will never learn how to do that. I need to get my prompt engineering training and all of these things too. But we are seeing that there's still kind of a pathway there, certainly for those occupations that are below that baccalaureate level, to be the people that are kind of building these tools that, again, are kind of rapidly changing. So I would say that it's interesting to see how those will grow and how we'll see employers signal change. Because right now I would imagine that my job description is not really going to mention any reference to AI, though they expect me to be able to kind of work alongside it. So how will we see that shift over time too? I think employers, back to this kind of up and down adoption of where we're at with that, how do we signal to the market what I'm looking for? How do I even refer to that skill? We'll continue to track that kind of a job postings data to see how that's shifting over time.
So you all have such deep experience in this space, and I wanted to ask, thinking about prior technological change, prior periods of economic uncertainty or change as well, is this different? Is it not? What are some things that you think about how can we best support people? What are the important things for making sure that these periods of transition are something that we come through together okay? Let's start with Lisa on this one.
Great. I think a lot of people point to previous transitions as a source of comfort, but I think the pace of change is so incredibly fast right now, and the particularly being in San Francisco, right, we have seen in the job market here and with tech employers such a prioritization over the last 9 to 12 months around don't add headcount, use AI to solve this need. And that has a really chilling effect, especially when it's then coupled with layoffs, and now you have a marketplace that's flooded with a lot of high talent people, and then maybe if you add on some federal government layoffs on top of that, that even increasingly adds to that chilling effect. I think that there's just sort of a perfect storm in the job market right now that we're going to see unfold over the next couple of years. And we need to resource it. And we need to resource it at scale. And so I think that that's something that I think a lot about. I'm really concerned about it because we've actually seen those resources be reduced and cut. And while there are, in fact, a lot of tools out there, I mean, AI can be freely accessible, that doesn't mean that everybody has the digital skills, the critical thinking skills, the time. I mean, think about time poverty for so many people who are just overwhelmed with living their lives. And so organizations, like all of our organizations, provide access to guidance, support, navigational support, emergency cash support, confidence building. Confidence building plays a huge role in the work that we do. Those things have to be resourced. So that's definitely a top concern for me. And I guess the other, just to put a really fine point on it, we are talking about sort of a set of intellectual problems, right? And yet I would say the vast majority of the work that we do is so emotional. We provide training in cohort. Those cohorts of learners are so critical for so much of the learning that happens. It's a community of support, it's trust building, it's the ability to say, I don't know, and get the answer from your colleague, or to help out a colleague who's struggling. And if you're too fearful to do that, you're not going to be successful in the workplace. So in sum, I think we have to resource this transition, and we have to recognize all of the supports that need to sit around the actual technical training.
Armetta, can you tell us a bit more about that as someone who did focus on
Yes,
wraparound supports?
absolutely, and I appreciate what you just said. And one of the things I was thinking about is as things change, change is constant. Change is always going to happen. And there are some things that remain the same. And so especially when we think about our low-income students, our students have needs. And so if we are offering these great opportunities for education, but we are not making sure we are serving the whole student, then that is where we fail as an institution. So ensuring that we have emergency grants available for students, ensuring that we are meeting students where they are as it relates to adult basic education, English as a second language, ensuring that we connect our students to childcare supports, making sure that we are offering tutoring support to students, ensuring that we are offering basic computer skills classes to students, ensuring that we have a food pantry on campus, and normalizing all of those access points. And so that really creates that sense of belonging for our students. We want to remind them that no matter where you come from, you belong here. And when students feel that authenticity around belonging and inclusion, that sets the stage for the learning. And so that's going to remain no matter where we go from a technological landscape, ensuring that we are putting our arms around our students and meeting them where they are, providing them with those supports, and even if we can't provide them with the supports, making sure we're connected to community organizations that can provide them for our students.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing? I think kind of as you were asking that question, I don't know if we've seen something like this before. And please, if someone has, let me know. Because I think, we talk about how it impacts education and workforce. I don't think we've ever seen also something then that has a natural resource impact as well. So I mean, of our energy resources, our water resources, and so we have those implications. We have cultural implications. We have faith groups, that really are challenging, from a religious perspective, is it okay to use AI? And so we have all these implications in these different areas, and I don't know if we've seen something like this that has been so widespread of the cultural implications, the natural resource implication, the policy all those different pieces. So I think this is something that's a little bit different than what we have seen before, and it does make it hard. How do you train somebody to learn something when we know it has the natural resource implications that it does? I know people have been telling me where I'm always saying thank you to ChatGPT, and they're like, stop doing thank you. That takes, and so we have that. But now if we're asking, other people just to learn it, but again, there's implications of just learning it. And then if you have, populations or communities where there's religious implications of asking them to use it as well. So I think this is a little bit different, and create some challenges that we might not have seen for something similar to this in the past.
And I think we're all learning together at the same time, which is another to your point of that this is kind of a change on a different kind of order of magnitude, because this isn't something that we have. I am absolutely not a power user of AI yet. I hope to become one day, and I think we all will. But we're all learning this together. So as we think about how we're embedding this training, how we're applying this in the workforce, how we're bringing people along in achieving all of these things that I truly believe employers are looking to achieve, the capacity creation, we can redirect kind of our time to things that do take that more critical thought, that we're not making these mistakes on routinized tasks and things that AI can be doing for us. I think there's going to be great productivity gains from all of this, but there is that risk of the exposure, the replacement, and all of these things that we have to track. Some of this has shown up in the data, a lot of it hasn't yet, of what are the ultimate effects that we will see from this in a rapidly changing space. So from like a training perspective, everything that Armetta said and access to that, especially people that aren't connected to these systems, making sure that we are creating places and spaces where they can come and get some kind of this training when they're not enrolled in a Clackamas college across the country, because that's a huge swath of people that are potentially exposed on these roles.
So one last question. A lot of our EERN viewers especially are students, and we have a lot of questions about, okay, so it seems like it's people entering the labor force that maybe are experiencing a hard time finding a job here, especially with what we know about sort of human skills complementing AI tasks. So thinking about what you would talk to people entering the labor market, or even advice for your past selves, what are your thoughts? Let's start with Armetta again.
Thank you. I would say there's such opportunity for all of us and for students to learn more and to welcome that learning. And again, to see AI as a tool to help support you in your learning and your growth. That's how I try to look at it for myself, right? It's not something that I should be afraid of. It is something that I want to embrace and learn more about, and to help me think about what I'm thinking about, right? How can AI support me in my own thinking, in my own learning, in my own, as an administrator, as a leader? How can I use AI to help make me better? And so that's what I would say to any student, is that this is an opportunity, a great opportunity that you have in your hands. Take advantage of it. And remember that there are supports available to help you.
I think I would add, all of us have to embrace being lifelong learners. I mean, every single one of us, and there's not anyone that can, avoid that. I think I would advise of remembering that AI is a tool that we have to leverage. And so you need to have some expertise. And so for those that are recently graduating, understanding that it's something that is complementing. It's not the thing. And so realizing like, what is that thing? And then how do you have experience? You know, show those experiences, take advantage of those internship opportunities, those co-op experiences, that you can have actual experience that you can show. A lot of what we talked about today is employers don't know what they don't know. We don't know what we don't know, sorry. And so being able to show that, you know, being able to go into an environment and be able to show how things can be leveraged to do your job more efficiently. But you have to know something to bring that to the table to show how you can leverage AI. And so those critical thinking skills, being innovative, being creative. And so I would say look at those experiences that you've gotten at college, at your, you know, and through your work experience and how you can leverage that. But one thing I'll say to be very cautious of on the same time, you know, we've seen all through workforce experiences, there used to be a time that we would use like resume builder templates for resumes back in the day. And everyone that would go through the program had the same exact template for, you know, a resume. You know, and now we're kind of in a similar situation of everyone's using, you know, AI tools to build resumes. Well, now you can't speak to that because you don't understand it. You know, because AI built this great, you know, expert, you know, resume, but you don't understand the skills that's there. So be careful of that. Someone was giving me an example of they had someone doing an interview, and it was obvious that that person was using AI tool that was listening to the questions and giving them the answers. But it was obvious they didn't know what they were saying. And so again, you know, I think again for our populations that, you know, they want to use these tools because they're hearing great things and it can help them, but they're not realizing like it's only to complement you. And so realizing that is really important, that these tools need to be a complement and not the thing. Like we still have to think for ourselves. So we have to bring something to the table and this has to complement us.
Lisa?
I would say 3 things. Build your people skills, build your AI skills, and build your network. And AI can be a tool that helps you in those other first 2. So for example, maybe you are really looking for your first professional job, you have a lot of experience volunteering or maybe being a lifeguard. AI can actually help you craft that story around how you've been collaborative, how you've been a team leader, et cetera. And so I think being able to show and communicate that you're a strong team player, that you're collaborative, that you have critical thinking skills, also demonstrating your AI skills, and then building your network.
And I would agree with everything that's said, and I would just double down on what Jimmy said about being lifelong learners and being adaptable, and how I want all people entering the workforce, that are in the workforce, that have left the workforce, that are coming back onto the workforce, to really think about that in real ways, because it used to be, in my past life, I worked for an organization that focused on lifelong learning, and it used to be kind of this nouveau thing to say. And now I just think it needs to be the order of the day. But with new graduates coming through, the adaptability that they have, the ability to learn at a fast pace and to deal with this fast change, I think is an asset that they'd be remiss to not to tap in terms of the value that they're bringing to the workforce. But we all need to be on this learning journey together.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. We're going to take a short break and get set up for our fireside chat. Thank you.
Daly, thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm fascinated by a lot of the research and everything we just heard. And before we get started, I'd just like to give y'all one more chance to give a round of applause to the researchers and the panelists for doing such a great job. And I really want to nail down into that research and talk about a lot of those things, but we did get questions from the audience. And I went through them before we walked up here, and I think there's one huge bucket that is a good way to start off here. Because what a lot of these people wanted to know is, what can and will the Fed do about AI's effects on the labor market? Obviously, the Fed has a dual mandate, and one of those is maximum employment. What can and will the Fed do? Will there be any guardrails? Will there be any changes in data collection, analytical work? What is the thought within the Federal Reserve about how to respond to AI's effects on the labor market?
Well, one of the reasons, as you know from being in this EARN conference today, one of the reasons we started EARN was to evaluate, interrogate not only the technology of AI, but how AI will shape the economy going forward. And it's because we need to know what the potential output of the nation is, how the labor market's going to evolve, and what our future looks like. That's how we make monetary policy. But at the same time, and this is the really important part, the Fed does not play a role in AI policy and thinking about how it will be used by businesses. We don't make those types of decisions. Our job is a very narrow one. We have congressionally mandated goals to have a safe and sound payment system, a safe and sound banking system, and monetary policy, which has two goals: price stability, full employment, as you mentioned. And we define full employment as the maximum achievable employment we can get over the longer run, consistent with price stability. So we have to study constantly this interaction between the labor market and inflation. But that doesn't mean we're immune to the changes that AI could be creating in the labor market. Right now, you've seen over the last year, the labor market slow quite substantially. It's softened quite a bit. Part of that is just the outlook for the economy is slower, so businesses are being more cautious. Part of it is that companies don't have to hire as quickly because they can do things with technology. That's a natural pattern. The previous panel talked about periods in history. We've seen some of this before. Some of it is just when businesses see the future is a little less growth-oriented because there's so many changes they're trying to manage. Even if they're cautiously optimistic, they just hire at a slower rate. And if they can use technology that's kind of coming on, they interrogate that and they say, oh, we can do more with fewer people, so we don't have to hire as many people. So we do watch those types of things, but at this point, it's very challenging for anyone, really, to know how much of the slowing is directly related to AI and using technology instead of people, how much is related just to being a little more cautious until you have a clarity of how the growth rate will go. And ultimately, AI is doing two things that we have, as a Fed, have to respond to. One is there's a longer-term trend in growth that it will create, but we don't make policy on the longer-term trends. We make policy on what we think of as the business cycle adjustments. And there, so many things affect the economy and the labor market simultaneously. It's really hard to say it's any one thing that's driving it. But as you saw, we took a 25 basis point rate cut to try to support the labor market through the slowing that we've seen and achieve both of our goals.
Yeah.
Long answer, but hopefully a complete answer. So
right. Hopefully that got everybody. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it is hard nationally to say what AI is having an effect on the labor market. Here in San Francisco and in California, I don't think it's hard to say what the effect is having. We've seen technology jobs fall in the last year repeatedly and over the last year in a pretty dramatic fashion, while we've seen spending go up on compute. This is basically the tech companies here in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco choosing to spend money on compute more than on people.
I don't think we can attribute that all to AI. I mean, there's certainly some of that that's about AI, but it's not all AI. If you think about the run-up in buying a lot of people, remember the pandemic?
Oh, yeah.
I know it seems far away, but you guys all remember the pandemic. So what happened in the pandemic? Technology companies, whether they were, they're trying to get Zoom to us, and I'm using that in a global way. They're trying to get, being able to do things when you're on the video, whether you use Zoom or other technologies, but you're trying to get that going. People have to buy a ton of equipment because they used to have equipment at their office, and now they have to replicate that at home. We were buying a lot of things, and those things were often technology things, and companies that were trying to build software to make our lives easier, trying to build hardware to just facilitate that growth, hired a lot of people. So they hired a lot of people, and there was this constant conversation about they're hiring so many people in the technology space, the technology companies, that regular businesses can't get technologists to do the work they need to do. So the natural evolution of that is if you had a lot of people, you're going to come down that curve, right? So I think part of it is that. The other part of it is that technology companies are like any other company. I mean, that's the thing that I think if you live in the Bay Area especially, you've always wondered about. Are they really like other companies, or do they ever have a business cycle? Because their trends always go up. But they're really mature now, and they're like other companies that during business cycles, shareholders want them to tighten their belts. They want to look for cost effectiveness, and so that often comes with hiring fewer people and investing in technology. We're not only seeing this in the technology space. And then, of course, we have this, generational change in technology with AI. And so that's, someone mentioned a perfect storm. I think it was Lisa mentioned a perfect storm just a minute ago. If I didn't remember who said it, I apologize. And I think another way to think of it is we have many things coming all at the same time. So one is a slower economy. One is tech companies have developed and matured. The other one is we have AI. And so that's why I caution us against thinking everything we see in the data on employment is just about AI. But certainly tech companies are thinking about what kinds of people am I going to need and what technology can make me better. I was at the Reagan National Economic Forum a couple months ago, and the head of Stripe, Patrick Collison, said, we're hiring more coders than ever before. We're just hiring different coders. So I don't think it's right to say that they're hiring no coders. It's just they're not hiring the block and tackle coders that they used to hire. They're hiring AI coders who can, make those things interoperable and make you faster, better, and less expensive over time as a company. So I think that the main message I'll give today is it's nuanced. And we're maturing in our recognition of AI to a point where we have to move away, if I may say, from being either doomsayers or enthusiasts. We have to move into, okay, what's practically going to happen and what do we practically see today? And it's mixed up right now because we have all those influences. We have so many transformative changes happening in our country right now. It's very challenging to pinpoint it onto any one thing.
Yeah, and when I talk to tech companies, what they tend to tell me is that what they are hiring now.
By the way, they're enthusiasts.
Yeah,
just in case anyone was wondering.
Definitely on that end of the spectrum, yeah. What they're telling me now is, yes, they want to bring people in who don't just code, but can oversee AI coding and implementation and other things and see it from a higher viewpoint.
Yes.
Which is great now, but for the next generation of people coming up, they aren't going to get those entry-level jobs. There aren't going to be the base coding jobs. How are they supposed to oversee AI coding if they've never done it themselves? The people who are in there now are able to see when there's a mistake, and there's lots of mistakes. AI still hallucinates a lot, that makes a lot of mistakes. And it's easy to catch if you've done it before, but what about the next generation that may not get that entry-level job that will teach them that?
Well, I think that the burden is on companies, and including all of us, to teach people how to identify mistakes, even if you didn't start by doing something, right? So I'm going to use this example because it's an easy one for us all to think we don't know how to do this anymore. So I grew up, my grandparents had a donut shop. I had to learn how to make change. Many of you probably don't even know what that means. But so say you pay with $1 and you've got a cash register, you have to figure out how many coins to give them in order to make the change that would give them the remaining part of their dollar back. I bet if you went out and randomly asked people in the population, they'd have no idea how to do this. But that doesn't mean we don't get our change back. We're getting our change back because we've learned other methods of computing what change you should get. And when we do the digital, we just pay with the exact amount, right? So I guess what I want to do is broaden our conversation and ask, what do we need to do to ensure that people who aren't going to come in as entry-level coders still have the critical thinking skills to identify when the models are not delivering the right output? And I think there are ways we can do that, but it's not going to be the same way we used to do this. I was speaking to the CEO of Honeywell at a panel one time, and he said that's what he worries about the most, is that you're not getting people to come in with entry-level jobs as much who do the things and make mistakes with the pen and paper and the coding, and then now they're in an evaluating role. How do they know how to do it? So, but what's really intriguing about private sector companies oftentimes is they don't say, well, okay, now we're doomed. They say, how am I going to train people to know how to do this, because I still need to make the products that Honeywell makes work effectively. But I do think that's our challenge. And so, maybe it means we have someone who knows how to do that, and instead of just doing it, they teach people to do it, right? So instead of just doing it for people, the code comes, they evaluate it, and then they say, okay, it's good. It's going to be the burden of the managerial groups to say, okay, how do I actually go about figuring out if that is wrong? In research, we face this quite a lot, right? So if you work in research, you use AI, you then get an answer, and if you just assume that's right, you're not going to be a very good researcher because they can have used the bad data. Data in that's bad gives you data out that's bad. So you have to evaluate that. You have to make sure your code is right. You have to see, does the answer make any sense? I remember when I was getting my PhD, I came with this really just amazing result that overturned everything that had ever been discovered on the topic I was working at. And my advisor said, I'm going to teach you your very first important lesson. It's probably not right. If you discovered something nobody else had, you better go back and make sure your code is correct. So I think that's part of what we're also seeing. So I'm less pessimistic as I am busy, right? I'm busily thinking, how do I unpack how I evaluate so I can teach people below, who are just coming up, how to unpack so they can evaluate. And I think that we've talked, the workforce development teams, community colleges, that critical thinking part, that skepticism that what you get out of a machine is telling you exactly the truth. I mean, these are not truth machines. They don't call them truth models. They're just tools, and we're the ultimate deciders. That's why the people who say we're going to take the humans totally out of the loop, that seems premature to me.
Very premature. And what I think about is how steeped in AI the next generation is going to be, because they're already using it.
They're native.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
We're trying to catch up.
Yeah, well, I think back to the late 90s. I went to college in the late 90s, graduated in 2000, and the internet was just coming out, and everybody was worried about what's going to happen to this next generation that's coming out. And, everything I learned in college about the internet was wrong, right? The internet changed by the time I got into the workforce. But I was steeped in it, like Bane says in Batman. I grew up in the darkness, right? I had spent so much time working with the internet.
This is the kind of panel I like being on. We just referenced Batman.
But I think that's what the next generation can take. If they're now working with AI in high school and college, they're already going to know what that AI can and can't do in a way that's going to be very hard for us that have been in the workforce for a while and are just interacting with AI for the first time.
Well, in here we have a nice reverse mentoring program, but basically I have a way of being that the younger the people are, the more they can teach me. And you can be middle-aged and teach me too, but I'm just saying that it really, you want to embrace younger people who are native in the technology to learn how to use it effectively. And then if you're older and you've been in the workforce more, then you can teach younger people how to bring that critical thinking to evaluate it. And I think that's why I'm not as pessimistic as many might be about this, because I just think this is a natural evolution. The thing that's always true in natural evolutions, though, is there's what we would call in economics transition dynamics. And the transition dynamics can be painful if you don't think about them intentionally. If we just let it happen and technology runs over us, many, many people who we care a lot about will be left behind and disrupted. So we have to engage early so as to support throughout.
Well, that leads me exactly to the research we just heard about and how to engage early on the long-term things we heard about there. So I want to get into some of the specific areas where we heard there might be issues. And first is in women's employment. When we heard about all the different areas that this is going to affect the most, it's areas where women are employed. We just saw women have a harder time coming back from the pandemic in employment. It took them almost a year more than men to reach the same employment level writ large after the pandemic. So now we're seeing AI affect women's jobs more. How do you get out in front of that? How do you do anything about that to avoid another problem there?
Yeah, so if you just stack up the occupations and things, and I think this is really great work, by the way, because it gives us a window into what can happen if we simply let technology take over. And that's what I'm advocating we don't want to do. You just don't let things happen, you get in front of them. So how can we get in front of it, as you asked? I think one of the ways is to help people in occupations that are going to be the most affected really learn how they can put it to their advantage, right? How do you leverage it? So I'm going to give you an example of the first real encounter in the real world I had with AI. So I went to a healthcare provider who I will leave unnamed, but a powerhouse healthcare provider in our area, and they would ask you, can I use AI assisted, and you sign a waiver? I said, absolutely, because I'm curious about what this looks like. So then you get someone who is a medical assistant, or physician's assistant, I always get them mixed up, but the person who's got enough training to make some evaluations, but not doctor level training. And this person used AI Assist to look at the x-ray of my wrist to conclude it was not broken, and which I thought I could do just by going on the internet, but turns out I was right, but that's by accident as opposed to expertise. But and then say, here's an appointment for the doctor, but in the time you wait to see the doctor, here's some exercises, here's a PT referral, try this because we think it's just sprained. I never went to the doctor because it was just sprained, and here I am, but I got treated the next day as opposed to 4 weeks later. So that's a female doing that job, and she just got better in a way that her productivity was increased, her kind of expertise was augmented, and now she's giving a service where I benefit and she benefits. So what my point is there isn't that these aren't going to affect, AI doesn't affect jobs where females are mostly located. It's that then it becomes incumbent on us to say, how do we use that in a way that's both safe to the customer, but also useful to the employee, right? Mm-hmm. And I asked her, I said, do you like this? And she said, oh yeah, it's very good. And she started reassuring me that she never uses it without the doctor. The doctor is looking at it in the back, but now they have one doctor helping. And it was just a really cool experience. And of course, I signed a waiver. I don't know that they'll be able to move this into a broader span because we do have rights as customers. But I think that's an important thing to think about. And I'll say one last thing there. If all of us are a little less worried about taking that risk, then those occupations are less vulnerable to replacement.
Yeah, and you bring up healthcare, which is one of the ones I really wanted to focus on. I've got a reporter back at the office right now looking at the Bay Area jobs report for this month, and technology jobs are down, a lot of jobs are down, healthcare and social assistance are up, and we just heard that's where AI is going to affect the most, is healthcare and social assistance. And it doesn't make me optimistic for the future, President Daly, that, looking at, we're seeing all these jobs go down, the one that's going up, I just sat and listened to a researcher tell me that's what's going to be affected by AI. Disabuse me of that.
Okay.
Make me feel a little bit better.
We're really good because we're spanning, I'd say I'm not going to call you a doomsayer, and I'm not going to call myself an enthusiast, but we're spanning the debate that most Americans and most people in the world are trying to have. It's like, is this going to be a net negative or a net positive? And I'm going to start by saying, it's in between. Nothing's ever a net negative. I mean, it can be net over time, but this is going to take a long time to figure that out. Mostly what I think we need to think about is how do we make what's happening today better? So let's think about healthcare. So first of all, healthcare and social services, education, those are the fastest growing groups across the nation. We're not unique, right? If you look at the jobs report for the United States, you look at the jobs report for the Bay Area, we look very similar, right? There's a transformation going on in technology space, manufacturing slower, et cetera, but healthcare, social services, education, those are growing. So then those are the groups that feel very threatened, I think, by what technology can do. But now let's go back and ask ourselves some questions. Is healthcare a place where you think there's perfect supply to meet the demand? No. We've had a healthcare worker shortage for more than a decade, where we don't have enough physicians, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough people to do these things. So freeing up some resources or making the resources that are there more productive can help consumers on net. So I don't think of it, I think those occupations are exposed because of some of the work that they're doing, but that doesn't mean that's a task replacement as opposed to a people replacement. So let's take those people whose tasks are replaced to some extent by AI. And let's ask, do you still want to be in the healthcare profession? What else can you do that AI might assist, or that we can use that for additional training? So these are decisions, right? AI is just a tool. And I think some of the conversation has to pivot to not how is the tool, how are we going to protect ourselves from being taken over by the tool, but instead how are we going to harness the tool to our greatest advantage? And I see opportunity where, in the healthcare, where there's risk, there's often opportunity to create better outcomes. And I'd say healthcare is one that most of us, if I did a call for hands, people would say, yeah, we could improve healthcare delivery, healthcare access, healthcare speed, and both the healthcare workers and the customers would be happier. So I'm optimistic more than pessimistic on this, but I'm optimistic because I'm optimistic people in this room and people outside of this room are going to say, we're not going to let this tool take us over. We're going to take over this tool.
Right. I mean, the one thing I would be concerned about is any overburdened, burnt out healthcare worker hearing they can be more productive.
Well-
right? And that's true that you can use AI to be more productive, but I don't see them smiling at that.
Okay,
you know?
but they are smiling at that in this way. Let me just, we do CEO roundtables as part of our EERN work, and we've done one with the healthcare, and it's one of the things that comes up in all of our work. And here's what I hear from CEOs of healthcare institutions. They feel stressed because their people are burned out. It's not like they're going to get burned out now. They're burned out. That's why they're leaving, right? So they're burned out. So one of the things that burns people out, and has for a decade or more in healthcare, is paperwork. How many here like paperwork? Like, nobody likes paperwork. So now if you go to your healthcare provider and you sign the waiver that many still sign or ask you to sign, where you're saying you can have an AI assist in listening and then taking notes and then writing report notes, that saves that doctor, that nurse, that physician's assistant, that anybody you're interacting with, so much time that they don't like to spend, right? So one way you can make people's lives more enjoyable at work is giving them work they value. So another thing I like to do is ask people questions when I'm in these different places, and I say, what did you get into nursing for? To help people. What do they think of as direct service, right? That's talking to a human, that's helping a human, that's consoling a human. That is not filling out the paperwork for that human. So if you take those things off, I think we could make it better. And if we didn't have a shortage of these people, I would be more concerned. But we do have a shortage of nurses. We do have a shortage of doctors. We have a shortage of many people who are necessary frontline people for the humans. And I just think that that's where the healthcare CEOs I talk to are worried, because their budgets are really in trouble. They have a lot of capital infrastructure they have to build because of just changes over time, and the budgets just don't pencil out when you're trying to get employees to fill the gaps. So people go into healthcare because they care about working with other people, and if you give them paperwork instead of people, they leave healthcare. So if we can get AI to do paperwork, I think that would be a good thing.
We only have time for one more question. Whenever I get a chance,
I could talk to you all day.
I know. I can keep going.
They won't listen to us all day long, but
But I like to, whenever I get a chance to talk to somebody who has a broad view of the economy and is constantly looking at this, is what to watch going forward. And I did get a question from the audience on this exact thing that says, what signals should we watch to know if AI is helping economic mobility broadly, or if the gains are concentrating mainly in a few forms or regions?
That's a great question, by the way. I mean, there's, in the economics world, there's really two, I wouldn't call them camps, but two perspectives that are well thought out, logically argued, and absolutely could happen. One is that AI will end up like computers. Computers had this great promise at the beginning. It was going to be an equalizer. Didn't turn out to be an equalizer. In fact, computerization and inequality were correlated, that it widened inequality. Now, there are super smart, potentially Nobel Prize winning people thinking about how that could happen with AI. What is the system by which that could happen with AI? But there's another whole group of people, and David Otter was one of them, he spoke here, who says this could actually help reduce inequality, because it takes the things that it makes many of us who don't have the skills of the few that were getting those skills, take physicians' assistants and doctors, it can make those people better able to do things that makes the skill sets less scarce, because now you've got more people doing that. So that also is true of regions. If regions aren't adopting AI and others are, well, then that's going to increase inequality. But if regions are uniformly adopting it, thinking about how it can help their region, their businesses, their composition of businesses, well, then it can actually reduce inequality across regions. So here I have a bit of good news, but this is the kind of stuff you have to watch for. We do the CEO roundtables, we go to small and medium and large businesses in the 12th district, which is the 9 western states. There's as much enthusiasm in Utah, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, in small businesses, in many businesses, in machining, in marketing. It's across the board. People are interrogating this technology investing in this technology and using it carefully so far. I think that's what is really important, carefully, to do their business more effectively, to increase their ability to, make revenues, be profitable, but also help their individuals. One woman said, we invested in AI and my engagement scores went up. Why? Because people don't do boring stuff anymore. And I think that's something we have to think about. So yes, inequality increasing is possible. Inequality not increasing or even going down is possible. And I'll end with this. Guess who decides? Not AI, us.
Well, President Daly, thank you so much for talking to us here today. That was great, and it's not going to be the end of this conversation.
Yes, I hope not. Yeah,
I'm sure
we'll
we're
be
going to
back.
be talking about this for many years. Thank you so much. President Daly, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mary and Jeremy, for that really insightful dialogue. And I want to thank everyone here in the room today, as well as online, for joining us. These types of events are really important for us at the San Francisco Fed and helping our understanding of economic conditions in the 12th District and using that information to inform our core functions, including our congressionally mandated work on monetary policy. So thank you for being part of this discussion with us today. If you'd like to stay connected to the San Francisco Fed and the EmergingTech Economic Research Network, please follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletters. Thanks so much for joining us today.